watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to the fourth series of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen GALPIN, and joining me today are two people who have starred in our Series 3, now transferred over to Series 4. Hayley Andrews, founder, CEO of Your Freedom Empire.
Hello.
Hello Hayley, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good trip down?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great
no traffic at all.
Oh, very good. That's unusual.
It is.
John Howard, developer, investor, author and mentor. And of course, TV star from our previous series. How are you, John?
I'm very well, thank you. I think I was in Series 1, 2 and 3.
Do you? Okay, well, that's more than I was.
Oh, in that case, maybe 2 and 3
2 and
then.
3. And now 4.
And now 3.
Okay, well, we'll get on with some good questions, I hope. And I think we have a sort of semi-political theme today, so that'll suit you well.
I'm warmed up.
But anyway,
Me and John be falling out again today, will we?
It might be.
Anyway, look, Hayley, we're going to start with you. Latest stats suggest that the COVID-driven migration from some of the big cities has now ceased. Manchester and London are reporting especially younger people returning to the city living. However, a significant difference in behaviour is being noted in Birmingham, where the migration trend continues. What do the panel think is driving these trends, and what effect will it have on the property market? Well, that's just made for you, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Miss Birmingham? Right.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. There has been a different trend to other cities such as Manchester, London. So I looked into this deliberately. So
I hope
looking
that's not
into,
just because we gave you the questions early.
No.
Right.
So I always look at population. I look at areas where population is increasing. I always look at movement, behaviour of people, everything. So that's something that I do on a regular basis anyway. So in looking into Birmingham, and of course we have seen in London and Manchester people, out post-COVID, moving back, wanting to be where the city, where everything's happening basically, back in the city centre. So it was quite unusual to see, well, why hasn't that happened in Birmingham at the same level as it has there? So in actual fact, looking at the statistics, and we're not talking huge percentage drop in population or anything here, we're talking about 0.1%, which is still quite high, but historically Birmingham since the 1900s has seen population fall and rise throughout the years. So it's nothing it doesn't worry me if that's okay. the question. But the reason we're not seeing people move, or we're seeing people move away from Birmingham on a very small scale, and people not moving back to Birmingham as a result of moving away through the COVID, is because actually they didn't move far in the first place. So they moved out of the borough, so Birmingham borough, and they moved into neighbouring towns and cities, where they get much more for their money, more space, much more affordable, and there's no real compromise because a short commute back into Birmingham is 20-30 minutes. So they actually didn't move far. So that's why we're not seeing them return post-COVID, because there's no real, there was no real compromise. So the two that went have come back now? Yeah. The other interesting fact that I don't know whether you know, but Birmingham have really gone down the route of attract, train and retain. That's their kind of model. So they're really looking at an education hub, new starter businesses. Yeah. That's what they're focusing on as a city. And I think that's great. We've got major universities, several leading universities. You've got many of the colleges now with university status. And I think one of the reasons we saw the population drop as well was because a lot of students, of course, the universities was closed, etc. So this, small drop, I think we will see a correction in that. But the people that were moving away were your older, middle age and
Yeah,
upper.
they want a bit of garden. A house
So that
and-
was another trend that we saw. They were moving, further away into neighbouring towns and cities such as Wolverhampton, etc. Still 20 minutes on the train to Birmingham, trains every 15 minutes. It's, the transport links are all there.
They're all very good.
So there was no compromise, and they got more for their money, and still a city life. And with Birmingham, we're seeing 16 to 21-year-olds increase. So I think Birmingham, well, it's always been known as a city of 1,001 trades. It's always been known for its diversity. It's one of the reasons I love it, and it's always been able to adapt and change with the times. And I think that's why it's always been such a great performing city.
Okay. And what's it like in Ipswich?
Well, can I just? Well, it's very good in Ipswich, thank you. But what I would say, it's all down to Andy Street, who's the Conservative mayor, of course, over the last 5 years. He's driven the city forward. I'm not sure Birmingham City Council are that clever, but certainly as the government created these mayoral roles across the UK, and that's a great example. Andy Street is a great example of a very good mayor who's got back in and who's driving the city forward, and it's got one of the youngest populations and growth in the next 5 years. And I know some of the facts that Hayley's come up with, because of course we invest quite heavily at the moment in Birmingham, second biggest city. Yeah. It's got an awful lot going for it. It really has. And so have like you said, the areas around Birmingham, the towns and cities around Birmingham. It's a very diverse, exciting environment to work in.
I would say it's one of the most diverse cities.
And most improved.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think in London, it's just the capital city aspect, isn't it?
Oh.
There's a need to be in the capital city for certain businesses, and it will always pull people back.
There's always a natural trend with city centres anyway. It doesn't matter whether it's London, Birmingham or Manchester or anywhere else. If the prices get to a certain it's not affordable anymore, then you move to the next postcode, and there's a ripple effect that happens. And I think that has happened. Yeah. People are still using Birmingham, people are still living in Birmingham, it's just attracting a younger audience, and the older 35 plus are moving out to your neighbouring towns. And their populations have grown. That's how we can see, what's happened with statistics. So it's not bad news at all.
Good. Okay, well, on that happy note, John, your question.
Yes, let's hope it remains happy.
And talking of happiness, with the dismal forecast issued by the Bank of England recently, predicting 10% plus inflation rates and effectively a recession for the next 2 years at least, what effect do the experts think all this will have on the housing market?
Okay, let me give you one stat first, if I may. Which stock market has performed best in the world so far this year?
You tell me, John.
The FTSE has.
Right, okay.
Right, that's the first thing. So we're doing a lot better than most other countries, if not every country in the world just about. So let's put it in perspective. It's a worldwide problem. I was with an MP a while ago who said, there's no way, John, we can control inflation because it's a worldwide problem. We can't control energy prices because it's a worldwide problem. So it's very difficult to see how you get out of this quickly. And a lot of people are now saying that putting interest rates up actually just makes it worse. It doesn't actually help. Now, I'm not an economist, but they're now admitting to 10% inflation. We all know it's double that at least, because if you go shopping, which I'm sure even you do a little bit of food shopping on occasions, you will notice, I can't believe I'm saying this, but anyway, you will notice that the cost of food has gone through the roof.
It has, yeah.
And as well as gas, electric, petrol, and all the rest of it. It's a lot more than 10% on things that you buy every day of the week. That is a major, major problem for any government in the world. And it's very difficult to see how we get out of it. But what was the original question?
Do you not think, John, you're starting to sound a bit like Boris in a way, because, the other day he said, we're the best performing country in the G7.
We are.
And yet the bank said we're the worst performing
listen, we need to be proud.
G7.
We need to be, this country, people in this country need to appreciate how good the economy has been in the past and how good it's going to be in the future.
We need to be proud and self-supporting, but we don't need to be burying our heads in the sand.
I don't
and not accepting what's wrong.
I don't think anybody's burying their head in the sand, but you do have to appreciate that it's a worldwide problem, and actually we're doing better than most countries.
Well,
if not every country.
I'm not sure
I
that's
wouldn't want to be in Europe at the moment, would you?
And again, I see the pundits on TV sort of say that right across Europe, the governments are doing a lot more to help people through these
because they've had
times.
to, because their situation is worse than ours. Far worse.
Right.
Would you want to be in Europe at the moment? I would.
I don't know. Hayley, what do you think?
I think the people it's hitting most, of course, is those that were already on the breadline, and we're seeing it across our portfolio, and people, struggling, and even staff asking for pay rises as well. Of course, inflation is still outstripping
it's a
pay
vicious
rises.
Circle. It's a vicious circle, isn't it?
But of course, as a business, you're affected by inflation as well. It's always, it affects everyone, not just your tenants or not just your employees.
No, but interesting, Hayley. In the past, no property person has done too bad out of inflation.
No.
In the past, it's actually done pretty well with inflation.
For property, you
but
pray
is that
for
going to be the
inflation,
case?
don't you?
But is that going to be the case this time?
I personally don't think so. The agents are telling us that the market's really going off now. I think everybody sort of thought we'd hit the ground running at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, we did.
It was always predicted that it would, though.
Yeah,
and
it
had to slow down. It had to
it's
stop.
cyclical, isn't it?
It comes down to affordability, lending capability, and of course, if the lending isn't available, confidence. You're definitely seeing a slowdown, I think.
Well, we'll rely on John for the confidence.
He's got backloads.
Can I ask you to ask me a question, please? Am I a better developer this year, investor developer this year than I was last year?
You tell me, John.
No, I'm not any better, probably. But I've been offered, and I'm buying a lot more deals this year than I was last year. So that tells me that the market is softening. There's more problems out there. We're getting many, many more opportunities. Now, you can jump too soon with all this. You can end up buying a load of stuff, and then a year later think, oh, I was too keen. I should have waited another year. But we'll see.
Well, John, you've been doing this long enough to know that where there's a problem, there's a profit.
Absolutely,
and that's
absolutely.
how you make a lot of your money.
A bit of blood on your hands, a bit of blood in the streets.
If it's not a problem, you
don't buy it. It's not a problem. Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again with Hayley and John after the break.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with Hayley Andrews and John Howard. Hayley, your second question. Rental rates are reported to be rising across the country, contributing to the higher cost of living we're all experiencing. The government has announced that it wants to reintroduce the Right to Buy programme, first introduced in the 80s. Do the panel think this will be widely taken up and subsequently have an effect on the buy-to-let business model?
Good question.
Great question. So they actually piloted this in 2015 in the Midlands, and it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because there wasn't enough land, affordable land, and then the pressure to replace every property that was sold at such discounted, the money raised from the sale didn't cover rebuilding.
Build a new one. No.
Exactly. So it was an unsustainable business model, basically.
So what's going to be different this time?
Well, that's what I'd like to know. Have they changed anything? So, I come from a council estate. My mum purchased her council home under the Right to Buy.
She likes Margaret Thatcher then, doesn't she?
Yes, she does, yeah. I think she was awesome. Margaret Thatcher, that is. My mum too. But
on Margaret Thatcher, I mean, she did do a lot for the housing market. She had brought in short-hold tenancies, which allowed the current spate of buy-to-let owners, really, because you'd never let your property out before because you'd end up with a sitting tenant.
Exactly. And if they're not careful, that's what we're going to go back to.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think there's pros and cons to the scheme, and I'd be interested, and I can't say I've I've read what the proposal is this time, or whether it's any different to the
different,
last time. I'm not sure.
I'm not
I know
even
it didn't
sure they
work
know
in
yet.
2015, and those are the reasons why. But not only that, it also puts massive pressure on local authority housing lists. You've got something like 3.6 million people on those lists. That equates to something like 1.6, 6 or 7, don't quote me on that, but around 1.6 or 7 million households. Some of those people have been on that list for 10 years. And not only that, while it seems great, actually you've got emergency accommodation and short-term accommodation has risen massively as a result of not having the homes that have been sold off to house these individuals. I also think that while the idea is nice, and I understand where they're coming from with it, and of course, as I said, my mum purchased her council house. I came from a council estate, so I see the positives behind it. But you also see people that are trapped in a mortgage, they can't sell the property, and the property falls into disrepair. It's not only about the mortgage, you have to maintain that property as well, and that costs money. And quite often what you see is they've got an asset on paper, but in reality they're living in a property that's not fit for purpose any longer.
Well, I think two things there, Hayley. One is that if we go back to the Margaret Thatcher time, when all these properties were sold, I think there was a stat that said, I think it was about 75% of those properties now are in the hands of buy-to-let owners. So actually, they didn't do an awful lot for the housing ownership.
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, if you look at the council estates, especially in some of the areas, around the areas that I invest as well, what many people did, I think there was a restriction on how long you had to live there after you purchased.
Yeah.
As soon as they hit that 5 years, they sold it, cashed in, and went somewhere else. And they sold them to investors.
Yeah.
And they were able to sell them to investors because they didn't pay. They got something like 70% off. Was it something like that?
Up to that.
Up to 70%.
Yeah, but I think, to be honest with you, you're being a bit. I mean, I'm not sure we're going to agree on too much there, Hayley, because I hear what you say.
That's okay. We can disagree.
I know we can. I hear what you say, and some of what you said I would agree with. However, it was a wonderful opportunity that the Margaret Thatcher Conservative government at the time gave people a fantastic opportunity to buy their own home who would never otherwise have done so. One of the reasons they did it, as always, because they know that if you own your own home, you're more likely to vote Tory than you are Labour or Liberals, and that's just a fact of life. And what they're really worried about now at the moment is the fact that in the 1980s, 50% of people under the age of between 25 and 35 own their own home, 50%. That now is 29%. And what they're worried about, with an election coming up in 2 years' time, these people are not able to buy anymore. But John, and that's a big problem.
But John, it's not going to be the young people that buy under right to buy, because it's going to be longer term tenants.
I understand that.
But I mean, the real point about this is, I think Hayley just sort of stumbled across one of the issues, is I don't think this government's really worked out how they're going to do it and what the restrictions are. These are, to me, it just seems like they're headline grabbing.
And that's always what it's about, isn't it? You have to look at the detail behind the headline. Yeah. And also it's a huge burden to tax. Well, not burden, but it's a huge cost to taxpayers.
Yes, but if you don't get enough for the property,
exactly,
and the money doesn't go back to the councils who are going to build more, then
it's not sustainable.
Can I stop you there? This government is the first Tory government that's allowed councils to build council houses. They've allowed them, and Homes
But they're
England,
not business people, and they're not building them at a.
That's not the government's fault. Homes England, which is the government bank, have got billions of pounds available to lend to councils and to housing associations to build houses. They need to get off their backsides and build more.
But if it costs 100, but they can't because of the lack of land, affordable land, and then obviously the development cost, selling at 70% discount or up to 70% discount, they can't build them that cheap.
They wouldn't be having any money out of those people if they don't cash them in. They'd have nothing because they had nothing forever. So be it 50%, 30%, 80% is better
I
than
looked
nothing,
at
and that money can go into new build.
I'm afraid I think the simple problem is that we run our politics and our decisions on a 4-year cycle.
Of course we do.
And I'm afraid unless you put into action a longer term strategy that's, in Hayley's words, sustainable, then nothing's going to work.
It will be short-lived.
But
Get
can
the
I just
votes
say,
short-term.
We'll be on
The uptake actually wasn't that massive anyway.
I think you'll find the uptake was pretty good. And can I just say, the government have been in power 10 years, so it's a 10-year plan, not a 5-year, and we'll be in for another 5 years, in my view.
The way you've got to look at it as well is the up to 70% discount on average equates to 15 years worth of rent.
It might do, but my point is that the capital value they're getting back, whatever it might be, is more than they'd have if they carried on renting it. So that be
to
at 30,
the individual, yes, I see the benefit there.
To the council, if it's 30% or 50% or 80% they're getting back on value, they can reinvest that money in new build, and that's what it's about.
But that's still taxpayers' money.
If you get 30 or 40% of the value of a property back, how do you invest then in 100% in a new build?
Well, because they're funding through Homes England and all these other grants. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing.
What happens,
not
you know?
Well, they're the facts.
I
You
can't
might not
see
be
it.
convinced or not, Steve, but they are the facts.
I can't see it
They are the facts.
as sustainable. There's pros and cons around it, but I think the way they do it really needs to be looked at. Otherwise, we'll just be saying we've piloted it again, as we did back in 2015 in the Midlands. It doesn't work because. So they've got to address those issues in order. I think it's a great idea, but it needs to work.
Well, we agree then. It's a great idea.
Come on then, Boris, let's have your next question. Right. Okay. Do the panel
Don't
think...
you have a party to go to?
Not too late.
Might be a better use of time. Anyway, do the panel think that the onerous surcharge impositions that the government is planning to inflict on developers, re safety instructions, will simply be passed on and cause an increase in the cost of construction? So, if so, what would the panel do differently to rectify the billions of pounds worth of unsafe elements of completed buildings? I know, John, you've had experience of this, and it's quite a serious subject. And I've just never been sure where the liability lies. You've got local councils giving consent for buildings, checking the building regulations, issuing the instructions. Developer does what he's told, he builds to that standard. People buy in good faith. So I'm not sure where the liability lands.
Well, I think there's two distinct issues here. So let's break them down. One is the properties that weren't built correctly and have got fire issues and all cladding issues and so on. Those ones need to be dealt totally differently, and any developer that's built them wrong and not got caught out, if you like, should be putting them right completely and so on. And there are some of those, but there aren't that many of them. So that's the first thing. So any developer that's done it wrong, fraudulently, must put it right, end of. Then you've got the other people, the other developers who've done everything correctly. It's just that the building regulations have changed over the years, and now the government have said, well, you know, they're not up to regulation standard now. Well, that isn't the developer's problem of 10, 15 years ago. And one way or the other, those blocks need to be dealt with. But to put the more burden on, which Michael Gove's trying to do, put more burden on the developers to pay even more money. I mean, some of these big developers, house builders, have paid out 500 million, £1 billion already, or pledged
They're
it.
going back 30 years on this.
It's madness, and that is wrong. That is wrong. Now, I came up with a suggestion I was asked by our MP actually, because we had a few problems in Ipswich, and I was asked by Tom Hunt, our MP, could you help me with a solution? And my solution is that every freehold block can borrow the money to do these blocks. They can borrow the money to repair the blocks. A lot of them have just need fire breaks at every level. Some need all the cladding done, but many just need fire breaks and so on. That's still expensive because of the scaffolding. Now, that block could borrow the money over 30 years, and it could add a small amount to the service charge, on a quarterly basis for the 30 years and get it all paid off. That way, nobody's responsible for 30, 40,000 a time straight away. They're only paying a small amount off the mortgage, and that mortgage is on the freehold, not on the leaseholder. So then basically whoever then buys the flat knows, well, there's another, £65 a month that goes on to the loan. And that, to me, is the most sensible, easiest way of dealing with this, apart from government grants, which they have given out, of course, as well. The whole thing is wrong, in my view, and I thought my idea was a very good idea. It didn't get very far, which I was disappointed about. So that's what I think. Now, on the other side is, will developer just slap it on another development? They can't do, because at the end of the day, the market's going to get tighter. Things are going to get harder to sell. And the one telltale sign is when developers start to struggle, you'll see signs saying, we'll do a part exchange available. As soon as anyone sees part exchange available, the market's not as good as it was. And it's all right you saying, and I heard you say it many times, Steve, oh, well, the developer will just charge them more. I don't think they can, because you've got valuations and everything else done, when someone purchases. So I honestly think that, I think for once, and I'm not saying in the past that we haven't had it away, but at the moment, I think the developer is being unfairly treated.
Okay, on that note, John, we're going to have to finish. That's all we've got time for. So big thank you to Hayley Andrews. Thank you for coming down, Hayley. And for John Howard, thank you, John.
Pleasure.
Good advice and answers as ever. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.